Cool. So I'm finishing off. I'm probably doing a little bit of everything, kind of combining a little bit of Johnny's and a little bit of Robbie's and throwing in a bit of physio stuff as well. So mainly looking at kind of common injuries, potential risk factors which can lead to these common injuries in the youth athletes, and then maybe looking at how to manage and prevent these injuries from coming on really. So a little bit just on the anatomy, very brief, kind of looks like a long bone there. So we know that growth tends to happen distally to proximally. So what that means is it happens from our extremities, so hands or feet, and then it comes further up or down towards your torso. So you've got the head of bone, which is like the epiphysis. Then you've got the metatarsus, which is a wider portion of the long bone. The physis, which is quite the important bit, it's the growth plate. It's where longitudinal growth happens. It's where they can close at different stages, and also it's where there tends to be a zone of weakness. So quite often injuries occur around that area. You've then got the main body of the body, and then the apophysis, which forms an important insertion point for tendons or ligaments. And we'll go into some of those injuries which are linked to that in a minute. So when we're training during a growth spurt, so when Johnny's obviously said about different growth spurts in the body and for different individuals, you might want to reduce your training load by 50%. Now that sounds like a lot. So not everybody's going to need to reduce their training load by that much. And when I say reduce, it doesn't mean that you completely cut out and go from doing 6 days of training to 3 days. It might just mean that you're still training, but you're training at a lower intensity. So it might be that instead of everything being hard, heavy, really intense, RPE, like your rate of perceived effort being high, it might be instead that we've come down, we're doing a little bit more on the strength side of things, we're doing some more balance work, we're doing more things which are fun and therefore reducing the overall load of training, but still keeping you in training. We might find that using a cushioned or like a balanced disruptive surface is better because again, it helps to take some of the impact off the body. So that might be beneficial during a growth spurt. And like I said, mainly linking up, doing more coordination, mobility, core strength, lower body strength exercises will really help you during a growth spurt. At the end of the day, the main things, especially in youth, is you've got to make it fun. So if anybody was here earlier, my son who was 7, he was in here for a good 45 minutes, having a nice play on all the equipment, jumping, doing some, lower limb exercises, but it was all about him doing obstacle courses and having fun. So that's like the key things we're looking for. Now, when we also look at growth, you tend to find that if people grow more than 7 centimeters in a year, that's when they're going to be more at risk of injuries. And then we also know that lower limb length, if that's more than 3.5 centimeters a year, that tends to be when you're more at risk of an injury. So they're kind of some of the numbers you're looking out for if you do start tracking your growth. So how do we prevent injuries? One of the key things you can do is screenings. So what a screening does is it helps to detect signs and symptoms of injuries. It helps to look at any strengths and weaknesses of each individual athlete. Sorry, I clicked that by mistake. We're looking at stuff like mobility, so how flexible are you? So looking at different body parts, seeing how flexible each muscle is. We're looking at balance. We're looking at muscle strength. We're looking at stability, and we're looking at movement patterns. So these things are things which we can do here. We do quite a lot of them with some of the local schools we have. So we have a scholar program at Leighton Park School, and they come in and do 3 screenings a year. We're also linked with Berkshire Cricket, and they come in once a year, and we do screenings with them at the start of the year. And then obviously there's stuff which they can then go away and work on to try and prevent injury and also to try and enhance performance. Because at the end of the day, that's the other thing we want to do. We're not just wanting to reduce injury, we're wanting to make athletes better. So how can we do that? So if we pick up on any things in the screenings, then we might go, actually, these things should hopefully help you reduce your risk of injury through growth relation, and it should also help you be a better athlete, better performance. Monitoring then can happen, so you can look at specific metrics, you can do data collection, so some of the stuff Johnny said, some of the stuff obviously Robbie says as well when they're in the gym and they're looking at more movement patterning, and then we combine it all together to make a profile. So you can have an individual athlete profile which links all their data and also looks at the sport data, so we're making sure that we're looking at you as an individual, but we're also linking it to whichever sport you're in. And then from that, like I said, you then might get given an individualized program or rehabilitation, which helps to aid, like I said, that injury prevention and enhanced performance. So there's lots of different growth-related injuries which you can get as a youth athlete. Most of these are due to the immaturity of the musculoskeletal system and an incomplete development. Most of them occur either through a large growth spurt or due to repetitive load or overuse. So it's just being aware of these. That tends to be what leads to injuries. So the main ones we've seen due to repetitive micro-injury is the osteostatus disease. So people have probably heard of that one. It's the one underneath your knee, the tibial tuberosity. You've got the Singling-Larsen-Johnson, which is more underneath the patella. So it's just a little bit higher up from the osteostatus. We've got severs, which is the one at the back of the heel, so a bit more like the Achilles insertion point for an adult. It's like a bit like Achilles tendinopathy as an adult, but it's more as a severs as a child. The ischium, which is the fifth metatarsal head, and then the little leaguer's elbow, which is on the inside of the elbow. I'll go into some of these in a bit more detail a bit later on. So another one just to be aware of, and I don't expect to go into too much detail on this, is that you might have something called an osteochondrosis, and this is down to inadequate blood supply to the bone. They tend to be atraumatic, so again, it might be something which nothing's actually happened. They present with a lot of pain, might have a limp on gait, and most of them we tend to see, it tends to be in the femoral head, so up around the hip, but it is just being aware that you can get some down in the foot at the second metatarsal head, in the navicular bone, which is in the foot, and also at the capitellum, so like around the elbow kind of area. Another one to be aware of is the avulsion fractures. So this tends to be a sudden injury. So what happens is a fragment of bone is pulled away from the main bone due to a strong sudden force. Again, it tends to happen at the pelvis, the knee, foot, ankle, upper limb, and spine. We tend to see them more like hip and knee area. And again, it presents with pain, reports weakness, so you might find that you can't do certain movements, therefore performance can be reduced, and they might even hear a pop. So just things to be aware of if you see something very different happening from a day-to-day walking point of view, or even when they're trying to do the sport, then they're just things not to be missed. Another one of those is the slip capital femoral ephysis. It's basically where the head of the femur slips off. So I always compare it a bit to an ice cream. So you've got ball and socket, the ice cream's on the cone. If the ice cream slips off the cone, then that's basically what happens here, but in the hip joint. This one tends to happen between 10 to 16 years, and it is more male dominant than female. Again, it affects the pain, and you have reports of pain, and it's the altered gait pattern. You tend to find that 50% of people report knee pain, although it is a hip-related injury, and about 25% of athletes might get it on both sides. The leg might appear short and rotated, and this one, if something does happen, tends to be surgery. Like I say, these aren't quite as common, but it's just something to bear in the back of your mind and to be aware of. The other one is the pars bone stress injury. This is when athletes present with like an aching in the low back, okay? So it tends to get worse with extension, so that's when you're bending backwards. It can be helped by rest. You might find that pain radiates downwards. A lot of them present with hamstring tightness, and it is due to that repetitive flexion extension sport. So cricketers, especially with the bowling, gymnastics, diving, football, and a lot of this, again, is due to increase in training load. So what you might find in cricketers, for example, they train through the winter, not playing a lot of matches, get into that build-up of the summer season, and all of a sudden they're doing a lot more bowling than they have been doing, increase the training load, and then that can lead to a pars stress fracture. So that's why there are a lot of rules in place now on how many overs you can bowl, and we try and build up gradually rather than going from 0 to 100. Now, I said I'd go back to some of the common ones. The main ones I'd say we see is the osteostatus disease. So it's where there's that traction to the tibial tuberosity. So like I said, that's a bit underneath the knee. It's a repeated contraction of the quadricep muscles, which can cause a softening and a possible like avulsion in like the ossification center. Ages 12 to 14 tend to be the most common ages who present with it. And again, it tends to be male dominant, so males tend to get it more than females. And long term, you might end up with a little bit of thickening and a prominence of the tubercle, so you might end up with a little bit of bump. Severs is the other one we see a lot of. So like I said, that's the one at the back of the heel. It's a little bit like Achilles tendonitis as an adult, but it presents as a severs in a youth athlete. Happens during the growth, rapid growth spurt. So basically, as you're growing, muscles and tendons aren't growing quite as fast as the bones, so therefore they're stretching and they're tightening. Age 7 to 12 is the most common. Again, males, it's more male dominant than females, so males tend to get it more than the females, and it tends to happen a lot more in the running and jumping sports. So things to look out for if you're looking at signs and symptoms for these two, does tend to be localized tenderness, so pain on specific areas. So again, when we see them, it's not really a vague pain. They can normally point with one finger. So if you ask where their pain is, they can quite often be like, yes, it's here, and point to the spot. There does tend to be inflammation and swelling, so you might find that there's some puffiness, there might be swelling around the area. Muscle tendon, there tends to be muscle inflexibility. So in the knees, you might find the quadriceps, the hamstrings are tight. In severs, you might find that the calves are tight. So this does tend to be linked with it. You often find that there's muscle weakness and imbalance. So again, screenings can help pick up on this. So you might find that they're weak at the glutes, you might find the calves, you might find quadriceps. There might be some postural deficits. So you might have that foot pronation, so what's known as flat-footedness. You can also have like a knee valgus, so like that knock knee position, so when the knees are kind of going inwards like a kissing knee. You might find that pain increase in activity tends to be what athletes report, and then they tend to say that it reduces when they rest. So how can we manage this? Activity modification is a big one. Does that mean stop sport? Ideally not. So again here, if we can keep you in sport, we will keep you in sport as much as we can. If you need to reduce your activity initially, we might say take a week, 2 weeks rest, depending on how severe the condition is. It might then be when you go back into sport, can you do some other things instead? So can you swim or cycle instead of doing a load of running junk mileage? So can you take that load off? Can you add in more strengthening exercises? And this can be body weight, it could be using a resistance band, it can be weighted. Can we do stretching? So can we look at increasing the muscle flexibility of certain areas? Can we use the ice? Because we know ice is going to help to reduce the swelling, and that's going to be a really key thing to do. So I normally recommend that after activity you put some ice on, because that will help reduce the pain, reduce the swelling. Can we use anti-inflammatories? Again, that might help reduce the pain, reduce the swelling. Soft tissue massage can be something which is beneficial. Again, foam rollers, if not, or massage guns. So using those areas where you've got the muscle tightness. Correction of biomechanics, you can obviously have an orthotic or potential heel raising from a severs point of view. And electrotherapy, some stuff we have here is if you go see a physio, they might have things they can use like laser therapy, which can help with the pain, and nerve stimulation, which can help stimulate the muscles if you're not able to do all the exercises because of pain. Tape can be used to offload. Severe cases, and I mean really severe cases, you go down the surgical option, but 90% of athletes tend to respond really well from a bit of activity modification and some swelling management. So I think they're the key things you're kind of wanting to work on to begin with. Other things in that activity modification is it might be avoiding certain activities. So key things I always say is avoid the things which aggravate it. So if you're a runner, hill running might not be very nice for you, so you kind of stop that, or it might be squats isn't great. So you're just trying to avoid whatever causes the pain, but try and stick and do other things. So if you're going into school, you might be able to play rounders, you might not be able to run, but you might be able to bat, or you might be able to stand and catch the ball. So you're still included, but you're limiting how much you're doing. So the role of the coaches are really important. Main things, we need to have proper instruction from coaches, and we need good quality coaches. So what I mean by that is do coaches know when certain injuries happen in their sport? And if you do, then can we then try and limit that? So can we then try and reduce load at certain points, or can we adapt things to try and make sure that we're reducing the injury risk at certain parts of the season? Can we be aware of the demands of the sport? So what is actually needed from the sport, and can we therefore avoid overplay? So for example, in rugby, sometimes you hear of athletes coming in who spend a good 10 minutes at the end of the session doing a load of kicking drills, or footballers who spend 10 minutes at the end of the session practicing free kicks or practicing corners. Do you need to do that? Are we overloading the athlete and doing overplay? So I'm not saying never do them, but can we make sure that we're not overloading it, so we're still protecting our athletes and stopping them being in that overload, over-demand kind of period. Having appropriate equipment, so that's really important. Obviously, if you're a footballer, shin pads. If you're using hurdles, make sure you go down them the right way. It's Robbie's laughing at me. It's one of my biggest bugbears when I see people using hurdles and they're going the opposite way. It just takes one knock for you to go and you sprained your ankle and then you're out for a couple of weeks. So make sure that the equipment you're using is appropriate and it's set up right. Other things, if it's hot, have you got sun caps? Have they got sun cream on? Are they drinking? Are you having more fluid breaks because it's hot outside and they need to keep the hydration? So these are all important things to be aware of. Making sure you have an adequate warm up and cool down. Obviously it helps to increase blood flow, increase circulation, gets you ready for your sport. And that doesn't mean in old school you have to get round in a circle and stretch. These guys are great in the gym, they make it fun, they might play a little bit of foot tennis, they might play a little bit of badminton or tennis against the wall. It's just doing something which gets you moving in a fun way, and then you're ready to go on to some harder intensity kind of activity and exercise. The other one is obviously enjoyment, activity, fun, make it exciting, make it different, make it so athletes want to be there, because that's, you know, if we're giving up time to coach, we want to make sure that athletes want to come back and want to do what we're setting them to do. And then can we educate them? So on the education side, it's kind of like, don't ever increase your training load more than 10% a week, for example. So again, not going up from 0 to 100. Can we make sure that they know the rules of the game? Can we make sure that they've got respect to each other and they've got good sportsmanship? And again, just educating them on certain injuries and being aware that if a player or athlete does look like they're struggling, what can we do to adapt it? Can we ease off, and instead of just getting them to sit out, can they still be included, but in a lesser way? So what can we do to help them? Role of parents, very similar to coaches, I'm afraid. So all of what I said kind of applies to parents as well. You have a few extra things though as parents. So try not to have any overpressure from parents. So can we just make sure again that it's all about the enjoyment? Yes, we want competition. Everybody loves a bit of competition. We wouldn't be in sport or doing sport if we didn't enjoy some form of competition. But let's not put that pressure on our children. Let's make sure that they're still enjoying what they're doing. Can we link more with education on nutrition, as this can affect growth? So with the nutrition side of things, there's another slide at the end, but little bits, it's more about, can we make sure that they're having a good amount of carbohydrates before they start training? Can we make sure that they're getting a good amount of carbohydrates and protein after training? Because that helps with the repair. Can we make sure that they're staying hydrated? So drinking fluid regularly. Have a water bottle with you, little sips regularly. Try not to get dehydrated. So if you feel thirsty, you're already dehydrated. So we want to try and avoid that by making sure that we're drinking little and often. Can we link with school? So like I said, if there's somebody who's injured, can we tell school? Can we say, actually, no, they can't do this, but they might be able to assist with that? Are schools good? And will they say, actually, do you know what, they can help set up, or they can do some of their physio exercises along the side? Or like I said, rounders, for example, they can stand and bat, but they can't run. So yeah, making sure that we're linking with schools and that we're trying to still keep kids included so they're not feeling left out, but doing it the right way so they're not being overloaded. And then just making sure we're linking with education on injury and the importance of exercise programs. So obviously as parents, you're the ones who have your children at home. I know it's not great sometimes, but when they have exercises to do, not all the time, but little reminders, hints, or doing it together, making it a family thing, just setting different tasks they can do so then they are doing them at home and then they're aware of why they're doing it. So the next bit's kind of linked in with the training load. So like I said to you, injuries isn't just about your growth spurt, it can also happen from an overload point of view. So when we look at training loads, the idea is that our body should be able to withhold the training load which we're putting on it. So if you're doing a lot of sport and activity, we need to be strong enough, we need to be flexible, we need to have good stability, we need to have good balance, we need to have a lot of things to be able to find that right balance. Otherwise you end up in a seesaw effect where you're at the high end and you don't want to be at the high end, or else you're potentially looking out for an injury. So it's just being aware of, are our bodies able, robust enough to withstand the load we're putting on them. So when we talk about sport training load, we're looking at the physiology of the body, on the joints. So what are our mechanics doing? Like I said at the beginning, are our knees going in? Are our feet pronated? Is this then causing overload in certain areas? What type of sport are we doing? Are we contact? Are we non-contact? What is it we're doing? How intense is the training? What's the frequency of it? So are we doing it 5 times a week? Are we doing twice a week? How long does it go on for? And like I just said, what's the intensity of the activity? So are we always training at 80% max, or do we do some which are high level, some which are low level? Then we also need to consider the general load, which a lot of people forget. So what's your commute to school like? Are you somebody who cycles to school? Do you walk to school? Do you get the bus? Do you have to get up early because you've got to catch the bus, in which case your sleep's being reduced? Are we doing recreational play after school? So are you somebody who, as soon as school finishes, you're down the field playing football with your friends, or out in the garden playing football, or you're playing cricket, or you're playing netball? Do you carry a school bag? And if so, how heavy is it? And are you wearing it on both shoulders, or is it on one shoulder, and then you're affecting your mechanics that way? What's our mental load like? Do we have a lot of homework? Are we in exam period? Are we stressed about school? Are we anxious about anything? And what's our social stresses like? So do we have good friendship groups, or is there stuff going on with the friendship groups? Is stuff going on at TikTok at the moment, or on Instagram? Is there stuff going on with any relationships we've got? Do we have any stresses at home from a family point of view? Somebody might be unwell. And sport, is there any stresses in sport? So is there a lot of expectation on us to deliver and maybe we feel like we're underperforming? And that could be like what Johnny said in his, that maybe from a growth point of view, one of your friends is achieving, you're not sure why. So is this all kind of happening and adding a lot of mental load and general load to your body? Easy way to monitor training load is to keep a small training diary. Now it can be really small. You can literally just write what your activity is, how long the activity was, the rate of perceived physical effort, so it tends to be scored out of 10. You might then do a rate of perceived mental effort, and if you have a heart rate monitor, what's your heart rate? So that might be what you do to keep it really simple. If you want to go into a little bit more detail, so recognising overload, you can use recovery sheets, and I'll give you an example of one in a minute. And this can give you more detailed information which might set you up for telling you if you're potentially feeling run down and you might be more at risk of getting injured or getting ill. So this links more to sleep deprivation and your quality. So how many hours sleep have you had? Do you wake up feeling fresh or are you still feeling fatigued? Are you tired? Are you alert through the day or are you alert when you're playing sport? What's your nutrition like? So have you got high energy levels or are you feeling a little bit run down, a little bit low in energy? Do you have any pain or muscle soreness? So anybody had DOMs before? So have you got any DOMs going on from your training session the day before? What's your performance like? Are you still performing well or do you feel like your performance has dropped a little bit and you're not sure why the performance dropped? What's your emotional state? So are you motivated to go training? Everybody has an off day sometimes and you're like, I don't want to go today. But is this happening regularly? And is there a reason why it's happening? Or are you just constantly in a little bit of a reduced motivation state, maybe because you're tired? Stress levels, I'd already said about. Hydration, easiest way to look at hydration is your urine colour. Obviously, if it's bright yellow, you're dehydrated. So wanting to try and keep that nice clear colour from a hydration. And from a female point of view, which we won't go into detail, menstrual cycle obviously can play a role in this as well. If you then are lucky enough to have extra support, physiotherapy outcome measures, goals can help with this, with recognising overload. So if we've obviously recorded some data of you, so we know what certain strength goals you've hit, or what your speed's like, or when we use force plate testing, if we know those things and then we re-measure them and they're dropping, then that gives us an indicator that you might need to reduce training load. So for example, when I've worked in elite football, we do an adductor squeeze test every day before training. We know all the athletes' adductor squeeze, and if their adductor squeeze is down, depending how much down it is, depends what training they're doing that day. So they might get pulled out of training and get put in the gym. They might get, yes, they can train, but they're only doing this amount of training. So that's just things which we can do. And then you might have sport-specific measures goals, and that's obviously very individualised to your sport, like I said with the football. So this is that example of, like, again, another really easy kind of sheet. So fatigue just goes on a 1 to 5, has some like written things on like what you could be looking out for, your sleep quality, your soreness, stress levels and mood. So what does an overtraining athlete look like? So many things you can look out for, signs and symptoms. Fatigue, tiredness, do they have an increased rate of perceived effort every time they train? Are they feeling heavy, muscle tight? Are they struggling to recover from training? So are they waking up every day still feeling tired and not ready to go again? Is their mood reduced or are they irritable? Has their mood just changed? Have they got a reduced interest in the sport? So are they just not wanting to go? Are they keep coming to you going, do you know what, I don't want to go running today, or I don't want to do this? Have they had more injuries or illnesses or like niggles than normal? So has that been happening? Because again, that's a sign of being overloaded. What's your sleep like? Have they got reduced sleep? Are they reporting waking up more? Are they reporting oversleeping? So actually you having to wake them up in the morning because they're so tired. Has that appetite reduced? Have they had more urinary tract infections? Like I said, is their readiness to go down? And has their performance reduced? Now the thing to say with this is performance tends to drop off last. So you'll tend to notice these other symptoms and performance is always the last thing to go. So don't be holding out for that. If their performance is gone, then actually they're already quite deep into being overloaded. So things you can ask. So as a parent, as a coach, as a friend, things you can be aware of. So what is your understanding of rest days? The amount of athletes sometimes I have come to me and when I say to them, okay, tell me your training load, what are you doing? And there's athletes I have who are doing something every day. And I'm like, well, hold on, well, where's your rest day? They're like, oh, well, this day was just a 30-minute cycle. And I'm like, but that's not a rest. That's still a 30-minute cycle. So, you know, we do need rest days, especially, you know, when you're younger. Yes, when you're old as well, but absolutely rest days are important. So do make sure there is something in there. What hobbies do you have outside of school sport? Is everything sport, 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 sport? Now, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I was one of those kids. But do you still have other interests when you see your friends and you go to the cinema, or, you know, do you like reading or listening to music? How do you cope with school sport? How do you cope with those stresses? Are you somebody who needs a bit of mindfulness to help switch off? Do you have outlets? Do you like watching something on TV? So how do you manage it? How many hours sleep do you get? So that's a good one. We always say we recommend a minimum of 8 hours sleep, so just being aware of that. Obviously, when you're a swimmer, they tend to be up early in the morning, training till late at night, so sleep is often reduced from a swimming point of view. But then I often say to them, well, can you rest somewhere in the day? So obviously you're at school, but if you've got a car journey somewhere, can you have 10, 20 minutes kind of either shut eye, or can you just do something which switches you off physically and mentally? So that might literally just be sitting, listening to some music, and that might be your deload. So it doesn't always mean having a nap, it might just be having a bit of a restful time. Like I said, do you wake in the night? If so, how often? What's your concentration levels like? That's not just in school. Some of us find it really difficult to concentrate in school. I was probably one of those kids, so that's okay. But what's it like when you get to sport? Are you somebody who's struggling to listen to the coach, who's struggling to keep up with play? Are you struggling from that point of view? How do you feel in the morning? So are you waking up feeling fresh? Are you waking up still feeling quite tired, like you still need another couple of hours of sleep? And what's your appetite like? And not just on a general day, but does that change in the lead up to competition? A lot of athletes, again, report that their appetite reduces in the lead up to competition because they're anxious, they're beginning to get nervous about the competition. Now, that's not always a bad thing, but it's about being aware, so we can go, right, well, how do we manage that? How do we put things in place to make sure that they've still got enough fuel in their body to be able to do what they need to do around competition? So overtraining links, we tend to find that athletes might overtrain because of pressure. So that might just be pressure they put on themselves. So them wanting to be better, them wanting to get the PBs or hit their best, score the most goals in the season. So just being aware of these pressures and expectations which are put on them. It can also be the ability to cope with school and sport. Like that might be really difficult if they're balancing that act of constantly being in school, going to training, doing something else and trying to keep up with homework. We also know during exam period that obviously mental load increases. So we do say that you should really reduce your physical load between 40 and 50% when you're in exams or a particularly stressful period from a mental load, because your physical load stays high, your mental load's gone really high, something's got to give. So if your mental loads come up here, physical load needs to drop in order to balance out both of those loads. And then like the reduced confidence, enjoyment, that's a really big one to suggest somebody's overtraining. Unless there is a particular reason why they've turned away from a sport, it normally is down to overload. So how do we manage this? Very brief. Robbie talked about a lot of this, so on athlete resilience. So we want to make our athletes robust. So how we do that is through physical strength, so that's max strength, that's endurance, that's power, it's mental capacity, making sure that they're mentally ready to be able to do what they need to do. It's their fitness, so that's endurance, that's speed, it's recovery, so nutrition, hydration, sleep needs to be good. And obviously this will all differ depending on what sport you're in, but they're all things which need to be included to make a resilient athlete. So how do we manage an overtrained athlete? My best way is the one on the picture at the top, so having a nice chill out on a beach with a lovely, beautiful sea. That would be my way of relaxing. But do we manage training load? So like I said, if we can keep athletes in, we do. If they need a bit of time off, they have a little bit of time off, mental, physical deload. Can we just stop it being such a high training that we then just reduce the intensity of training down? Can we improve their sleep quality? I've already spoken a little bit about that, on how we can include naps or have a little bit of mindfulness, just having that little bit of shutdown to give them a little bit of improved rest. Can we improve their nutrition? So like I said, can we be increasing their nutritional intake? So is it that actually, because they're training up here and they think they're eating enough, but actually they're not getting enough fuel in to manage the load they need to do? So for example, if you have your car, you wouldn't fill it half full with petrol and expect it to make it to the other side of the country, because it's not going to get there. It's the same as you as an individual. Our food is the petrol for the car. We need to make sure we're given enough to be able to do what we want it to do. Hydration, like I said, the other good one, like really making sure regular sips, keep hydrated, and social relaxation. So that might just be switch off from sport. That might be just seeing your friends. That might be family time. It's, you know, whatever works for you as an individual, but just having some social relaxation so you're not constantly under that pressure of sport and achieving. So energy levels, like I said, energy is needed for growth and needed for prevention of injuries. So rough energy expenditure from males and females, and that is obviously like plus and minus those amounts. So you can see, you know, it is quite high how much we kind of use. And lack of energy not only can affect performance, but can actually affect our growth. So it can reduce the growth. So just being aware of that. And like I said, that energy level is a bit like that petrol or like a fully charged iPhone. Let's go for that. Everybody loves their iPhones, most of them. So if your battery's full, then it's going to give you the best outcome. You're going to be able to use it. You're going to be able to take your photos, your videos. You're going to be able to message. When your battery's drained, it doesn't really work that well. And at some point, it's going to turn off. So same for us as a body. We need to keep topping up that battery. So how can we top it up? So little just key points from a nutrition point of view. Iron requirements, especially for female during menstruation, that's a really good one to be aware of. Fat is also important from a puberty to aid hormone synthesis and assist the body function. Increased carbohydrates, especially if you're exercising for longer than 60 to 90 minutes. And making sure that, or being aware that youth athletes do use up energy stores quicker than adults. So therefore they can fatigue more during prolonged exercise. So we need to make sure that they're fueling more, so they're getting more food in. And that is everything from me. Whistle stop.